We love you very much and we want you to come back to us. That's all I can say. Please get in touch with anyone. I can't go on, but that's it, I can't.
5 years searching my mind, my brain, like a video going over and over and over. See
if you've missed anything.
in that grey bit before you're in between being awake and being asleep.
Needham vanished 3 months after arriving on the Greek island of Kos. His family had taken their life savings and escaped from unemployment in Sheffield in search of a better life. On the day Ben disappeared, his grandparents were looking after him. His mother, Kerry, was at work in a local hotel. Ben's father, Simon, unable to find a job on the island, had returned to Sheffield 2 days earlier.
In the summer of 1991, on the Greek island of Kos, 21-month-old Ben Needham suddenly vanished without a trace while playing. With no witnesses and no clues, the toddler disappeared, as if into thin air. After more than 2 decades of exhausting searches, thousands of theories were raised. Was he abducted, or was there a secret buried beneath the earth? The case seemed to have hit a dead end until a belated testimony emerged, uncovering the truth. How does a lively child simply cease to exist in the blink of an eye, especially when his loved ones are merely footsteps away? This agonizing question lies at the very heart of one of the most perplexing and heart-wrenching missing person cases in modern history. It defies all logic and parental instinct that a toddler could completely vanish within a window of just a few short minutes, leaving absolutely no physical trace, no sound, and no clues behind for anyone to follow. The setting was the picturesque Greek island of Kos during the sweltering summer of 1991. The Needham family had temporarily settled there, embracing a new chapter in their lives. On that fateful day, 21-month-old Ben Needham was doing exactly what any happy, energetic toddler would do. He was playing freely around the open doorway of a rustic farmhouse that his grandparents were painstakingly renovating. Surrounded by family members who were bustling about their daily tasks, the atmosphere was entirely ordinary. Ben was running in and out of the house, his footsteps echoing under the Mediterranean sun as he amused himself near his grandfather's workspace. Then, the unthinkable happened. In a chillingly brief moment, a mere lapse in visual contact that happens routinely in every household with young children, the boy slipped out of sight. There were no unusual noises, no sudden cries of distress, and no suspicious vehicles heard speeding away from the property. It was a silent, lightning-fast disappearance that would plunge the family into a decades-long nightmare. When the adults realized the toddler had been unusually quiet, the immediate assumption was that he had simply wandered a few steps too far. Recalling that agonizing day in an interview, Ben's mother, Kerry Needham, described the surreal and devastating nature of the tragedy.
For a couple of minutes, he just didn't come back in the doorway, and my mum just went outside the doorway and just wasn't there. She obviously shouted his name. He just didn't answer. There was just no sign of him at all. It was like he'd vanished into thin air, really.
The aftermath of that chilling silence was absolute chaos. The family frantically scoured the immediate vicinity, tearing through the rugged terrain and desperately calling out for the little boy. When local police joined the effort, a massive search operation was launched across the island. Yet, despite the intense scrutiny of the area, authorities found absolutely nothing. There were no footprints leading away from the property, no dropped items, and no witnesses who had seen a child wandering alone. The entire initial search effort by both the family and the police quickly plummeted into a frustrating, devastating dead end. The farmhouse instantly became ground zero for a mystery that would haunt the world for over a quarter of a century. When a crime scene yields absolutely zero physical evidence, how can investigators possibly identify a victim decades later? In one of the most extraordinary twists in the Ben Needham investigation, detectives realized that the only indisputable key to unlocking the mystery was not found in the arid soil of Greece, but in a single, microscopic drop of dried blood taken just days after his birth in the United Kingdom. Back in the summer of 1991, forensic DNA profiling was still in its infancy. Amidst the chaos of the initial disappearance, Greek local authorities did not think to secure or store any of the toddler's clothing, hairbrushes, or personal possessions for future genetic testing. By the time science had advanced enough to potentially solve such cold cases, the physical trail had long since vanished. However, in 2011, 20 years after Ben went missing, detectives from the South Yorkshire Police realized there was one untouched biological record left. Like millions of other babies born in the UK, Ben had undergone a routine Guthrie test, a standard heel prick blood test used to screen infants for metabolic conditions. That tiny card, bearing his unique genetic blueprint, had been quietly archived by the National Health Service since his birth at a hospital in Lincolnshire. Retrieving that sample, however, was not as simple as making a phone call. Because Ben was technically over the age of 18 by 2011, authorities could not legally access his medical records without his personal consent. This bizarre legal paradox forced the South Yorkshire Police into a grueling months-long legal battle. They eventually took the unprecedented step of applying to the High Court in London. In a landmark decision, the court granted permission to release the blood sample, finally providing investigators with an undisputed DNA profile of the missing boy. The primary objective behind this monumental legal effort was deeply rooted in hope. At that time, the prevailing theory fiercely embraced by the family was that Ben had been taken and was living as an adult under a completely different identity somewhere in the world. By securing his foundational DNA, police could finally cross-reference his genetic markers with international databases, hoping for a match. For Ben's mother, this scientific breakthrough brought about a profound and heartbreaking shift in perspective. In a desperate bid for answers, she found herself praying for scenarios no parent ever wants to imagine. Reflecting on this bitter irony in an interview with the Help Find Ben campaign, Carrie Needham articulated the unimaginable desperation of a grieving mother.
Probably this is one of the first time any mother would probably wish that their child's committed an offence in whichever country that he's in, because obviously, you know, if he has been in trouble with the police or been involved in an accident, Ben will flag up if his DNA is held by any of these authorities.
That single drop of neonatal blood became a beacon of hope, a microscopic bridge across a 20-year void, meant to finally bring a lost boy out of the shadows. How do you pierce through a formidable wall of silence that has stood firm for a quarter of a century? For 25 agonizing years, a tight-knit community on a sun-drenched Mediterranean island seemingly held onto a dark, unspoken secret, leaving a grieving family trapped in an endless limbo. Realizing that traditional investigative methods and physical searches had reached their absolute limits, British authorities decided it was time to launch an aggressive, highly targeted psychological campaign. Armed with a substantial cash reward, they crossed European borders, fiercely determined to shatter the decades-old silence and finally unearth the truth that had been buried in the Greek soil. In May 2016, a dedicated team of 10 detectives from the South Yorkshire Police boarded a flight to the Greek island of Kos. This marked a massive and official reboot of the cold case, backed by a fresh injection of funding from the UK Home Office. The detectives' objective was crystal clear. They were no longer just looking for forensic evidence in the dirt. They were actively hunting for a human confession. To incentivize anyone harboring knowledge of the tragedy, they offered a £10,000 reward for new, concrete information. The strategy was deliberately designed to appeal to the suppressed conscience, or perhaps the financial needs of local residents who might have been far too intimidated, loyal, or frightened to step forward back in 1991. However, this high-stakes, emotionally charged operation was nearly derailed by an unexpected and controversial media storm. Shortly after the British detectives arrived on the island, a UK tabloid published covert photographs of the investigative team drinking and relaxing at a local bar after a grueling, emotionally draining day of work. The backlash was immediate and severe, with the lead detective even being temporarily summoned back to the UK, threatening to jeopardize the entire mission. Yet, in a powerful and moving display of unity, it was Ben's mother, Carrie Needham, who fiercely stepped up to defend the officers. She publicly slammed the newspaper for its unnecessary and destructive reporting, emphasizing that these detectives were dedicated human beings who were working tirelessly for her family and had her absolute, unwavering trust. Undeterred by the frustrating media distraction, the investigative team pressed forward with absolute conviction. The commanding officers flatly refused to accept the impossible notion that a toddler could vanish without a single person seeing or knowing something. They firmly believed that the key to solving this heartbreaking mystery had never actually left the island. Addressing the press and directly pleading with the local Greek community, the detective superintendent leading the investigation made a powerful appeal.
I want to know where my son is. I want to know what happened to him. And someone knows exactly what happened to him. And I need more resources, not resources taken away from me. I have never been disrespectful to the government or South Yorkshire Police, but it's enough now. You can't keep taking everything away from me. Ben deserves more, not less. And this is what I want from now on. And I will go and I will fight whoever I need to fight, because I am not letting this go.
This relentless tactical push would soon prove to be the most critical turning point in the investigation, shaking the island's foundation and leading to a revelation no one saw coming. If you want to follow the shocking next chapters of this tragic story and stay updated on more deep dive true crime analyses, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. For a quarter of a century, the prevailing theory that sustained the Needham family through their darkest hours was that Ben had been snatched by opportunists or an illicit adoption ring. They clung to the desperate hope that he was still alive, growing up somewhere across the globe, unaware of his true identity. But what if the agonizing reality was far less elaborate and infinitely more tragic? What if there was no transnational abduction, no shadowy kidnapping syndicate, and the devastating truth was simply a catastrophic accident, hastily covered up right at the very spot where the toddler took his last visible steps? The £10,000 reward and the relentless psychological campaign launched by British detectives in 2016 finally pierced the island's long-held wall of silence. A surprise witness, a local individual who had carried a crushing burden of knowledge for decades, unexpectedly stepped out of the shadows. This unprecedented testimony abruptly shifted the entire trajectory of the investigation. It forced authorities to abandon the hopeful, global hunt for a living adult and aggressively refocus their attention on the arid, dusty soil surrounding the Koss farmhouse, where the nightmare began. The newly provided information painted a grim and devastating picture of that summer afternoon in 1991. According to the witness, heavy construction machinery was actively clearing land adjacent to the property at the exact time the toddler was playing outside. The core hypothesis that emerged was utterly heartbreaking. Ben was not taken by strangers. Rather, he was the victim of a fatal accident. The testimony suggested that the little boy was inadvertently struck and subsequently buried beneath mounds of earth and building rubble by a digger operating near the farmhouse. The witness noted that the heavy machinery continued to move soil and clear the area even after Ben was realized to be missing, thereby concealing the tragedy deep beneath the ground, whether out of sheer panic or a calculated decision to hide the truth. The focal point of this harrowing new lead was a local construction worker and digger driver named Konstantinos Dinos Barkas. However, the pursuit of direct accountability and answers from the man himself would forever remain out of reach. Barkas had passed away just a year prior in 2015, taking his ultimate version of events with him to the grave. While his widow vehemently dismissed any suggestion that her late husband was involved, the South Yorkshire Police deemed the witness's account highly credible. It provided the first logical, albeit horrifying, explanation as to why no physical trace of the child had ever been found above ground, prompting detectives to authorize an immediate, massive excavation of the surrounding farmland. For Carrie Needham, who had spent 25 years waking up with the comforting belief that her son was alive and well, this revelation was an unimaginable psychological blow. To learn that her child had likely died on the very day he vanished, and worse, that people in the community had watched her endure a highly publicized, agonizing search for decades while guarding this dark secret, felt like the ultimate betrayal. Relaying her sheer devastation, righteous anger, and profound grief to the press, the police shared her heartbreaking sentiment: "We deserve the truth, but we deserved the truth 25 years ago." This agonizing realization irrevocably changed the Needham family's narrative. The desperate, decades-long search for a living boy had brutally concluded. The somber quest to find his remains and finally bring him home had just begun. There is a profound and bitter irony in the way the physical search for Ben Needham ultimately concluded. If the chilling new witness testimony was accurate, a heavy construction digger had been the instrument of the toddler's tragic demise and the tool used to blindly bury him in 1991. Now, exactly 25 years later, it would require an entirely new fleet of police excavators to tear into that very same earth, dismantling the tranquil landscape in a desperate bid to unearth the secrets left behind by the first machine. In late September 2016, the quiet, sun-baked farmland on the island of Kos was transformed into an active, highly restricted forensic zone. British detectives from the South Yorkshire Police, working alongside a team of specialized forensic anthropologists and search advisors, initiated a massive, deeply intrusive excavation. This was not a superficial sweep of the terrain. The operation demanded that they rip apart the very grounds where Ben had last been seen playing happily. The searchers moved methodically, stripping away topsoil, digging deep into the arid earth, and even taking the drastic step of demolishing parts of the farmhouse's outbuildings and extensions that had been constructed in the years following the disappearance. The police were absolutely determined to leave no stone unturned, meticulously sifting through tons of dirt, inch by agonizing inch. However, the excavation process was fraught with immense logistical and emotional challenges. Because the site had a rich agricultural heritage and had been an active farming plot for generations, the subterranean layers were heavily littered with hundreds of bone fragments. Each time the diggers unearthed a skeletal piece, the entire operation had to grind to a nerve-wracking halt. Forensic experts had to carefully examine the remains, plunging Ben's family, who were waiting anxiously back home, into an unbearable emotional roller coaster of false alarms, only to ultimately identify the fragments as belonging to dogs, sheep, or other farm animals. The grueling labor under the relentless Mediterranean sun tested the endurance of the investigators, but the haunting prospect of leaving Ben behind pushed them forward. Then, after weeks of moving mountains of earth, the landscape finally yielded its long-held secrets. The breakthrough did not come from human remains, but from objects far more heartbreaking in their innocence. At a secondary excavation site, approximately 750 meters away from the farmhouse where Ben had last been seen, investigators pulled two distinct, heavily degraded items from the dirt. The first was a small, worn leather sandal. Its size and design were chillingly consistent with the exact type of footwear the 21-month-old toddler was known to be wearing on the day he vanished. Shortly after, the searchers discovered a deeply rusted, metallic toy car, a simple, beloved plaything that perfectly matched the description of the toys Ben had been playing with around the farmhouse doorway. Finding these two personal items buried deep in the ground, specifically in an area where construction debris had allegedly been dumped by the digger driver decades earlier, felt like a devastating confirmation of the new hypothesis. These artifacts were no longer just pieces of buried rubble. They were tangible, heartbreaking echoes of a lost little boy. Carefully extracted from the Greek soil and sealed in secure evidence bags, the sandal and the rusty toy car were immediately prepared for a journey back to the United Kingdom. There, they would face the unforgiving scrutiny of modern forensic science, setting the stage for a revelation that would finally close the door on the mystery. How can inanimate objects, buried deep beneath layers of dirt and silence for over a quarter of a century, suddenly tell a story? For 26 years, the truth about Ben Needham's disappearance was locked away, hidden by human secrecy, shifting landscapes, and the unforgiving passage of time. But where human witnesses refuse to speak, or take their darkest secrets to the grave, modern science can step in to give a voice to the voiceless. The deeply rusted metal toy car and the tiny worn leather sandal unearthed from the dry soil of Kos were about to break the decades-long silence, acting as the ultimate witnesses to a tragedy that had eluded the world. In 2017, these heartbreakingly fragile artifacts were carefully transported from the sweltering Mediterranean heat back to the United Kingdom. They were sealed in secure evidence bags and destined for one of the most advanced forensic facilities available. At a highly specialized research institute in Aberdeen, Scotland, world-class scientists subjected the degraded items to intense, cutting-edge scrutiny. The mission was to look far beyond the rust, the embedded dirt, and the natural decay, searching for microscopic biological clues that might have somehow survived the crushing weight of time and Earth. The results generated by the Aberdeen laboratory were both groundbreaking and profoundly devastating. Using highly sensitive forensic techniques that were simply unimaginable when the toddler first vanished in 1991, scientists made a chilling discovery. They definitively confirmed the presence of human blood on the surfaces of both the leather sandal and the rusted metal toy. The blood had seeped into the materials, binding itself to the items during some unknown event before they were cast into the earth. It was a microscopic, yet undeniable, signature of tragedy. While the experts cautioned that the severe environmental degradation made it impossible to pinpoint the exact age or quantity of the blood, the mere fact that human blood had come into contact with the toddler's presumed belongings was a staggering revelation. The immediate next step for the forensic team was the most critical phase of the entire investigation, attempting to extract a viable DNA profile from these microscopic, degraded blood traces. This is where the relentless foresight and dedication of the South Yorkshire Police truly culminated. Had investigators not fought that grueling legal battle at the High Court in 2011 to secure Ben's neonatal Guthrie test, the routine heel prick blood sample, taken just days after his birth, there would be no baseline for comparison. Now, scientists were painstakingly working to cross-reference any genetic material pulled from the Koss artifacts with the undisputed DNA blueprint of the missing boy. For Carrie Needham, the emergence of this irrefutable scientific evidence was the final, crushing blow to a belief that had kept her breathing for 26 years. Until this very moment, despite the massive excavation and the terrifying digger hypothesis, a tiny, defiant spark of hope had remained that her boy was out there in the world, living a full life under a different name. But the undeniable forensic reality of human blood found on her son's cherished playthings left no room for comforting fantasies. Science had abruptly replaced hopeful speculation with harsh, unyielding facts. This devastating turning point forced a grieving mother into an agonizing psychological transition. She had to slowly, painfully let go of the hope that Ben was still alive. The endless, desperate search for a living son had formally concluded, transforming into a mournful, heartbreaking quest to simply understand his final moments and bring his memory peace. How much is the truth worth when the prospect of justice is no longer an option? For most families thrust into the center of a horrific tragedy, the ultimate goal is seeing those responsible stand trial and face the full weight of the law. But what happens when the agonizing, decades-long need for answers completely eclipses the desire for retribution? In a profound and desperate compromise that highlighted the depths of a mother's exhaustion, the family of Ben Needham made an extraordinary public vow. They declared they would entirely forfeit any pursuit of legal punishment, offering a guarantee of absolute safety to those who hid the truth, in exchange for one single, invaluable thing: peace. By the time 2020 arrived, the landscape of Carrie Needham's grief had fundamentally shifted. Nearly 30 years had passed since her vibrant, 21-month-old toddler vanished without a trace on the sun-baked Greek island of Kos. The culmination of relentless police investigations, the emotionally crushing excavations of 2016, and the cold, unyielding forensic evidence had finally taken their toll. After spending a lifetime fiercely clinging to the hope that Ben was still alive and growing up under a different identity, Carrie was forced to confront the darkest reality. She bravely, yet reluctantly, accepted the overwhelming likelihood that her son had tragically perished in a fatal accident involving a heavy digger on that very summer afternoon in 1991. Accepting the death of a child is an unimaginable burden for any parent, but accepting that his passing was deliberately concealed by the very community she had pleaded with for decades added a layer of insurmountable cruelty. Yet, instead of allowing anger and bitterness to entirely consume her, Carrie chose a path of absolute pragmatic desperation. In a final, emotionally shattered plea broadcast to the world, most notably echoed during her poignant media interviews, she directly addressed the individuals who still harbored the remaining pieces of this puzzle. She knew someone out there knew exactly how the accident unfolded and, most importantly, where Ben's fragile remains were hidden in the aftermath. To break their lingering silence, she leveraged a critical legal technicality as an olive branch, the Greek statute of limitations. Carrie publicly and repeatedly emphasized that because well over 20 years had passed since the day of the disappearance, the legal window for criminal prosecution in Greece had permanently and definitively closed. She offered a blanket assurance of safety to anyone holding the secret, making it absolutely clear that providing information regarding the digger accident or the location of the body would result in zero legal repercussions. No one would face a courtroom, no one would be arrested, and no one would go to prison. The family promised to take the information, leave the informants in peace, and quietly walk away. This was no longer a criminal manhunt. It was a purely humanitarian plea from a broken mother begging for the return of her boy. The Needham family's ultimate wish had been stripped of all desires for vengeance. They simply wanted the rest of the truth. They needed to find Ben, bring his remains back to the United Kingdom, and lay him to rest with the love and dignity he had been denied for a lifetime. After enduring nearly 3 decades trapped in a waking nightmare living a life put on a grueling, indefinite hold, Carrie Needham asked for nothing more than the chance to finally grieve properly. By surrendering the pursuit of punishment, she hoped to secure the one thing her family desperately needed to rebuild their shattered existence and, at long last, find closure.